Bob Chapman spent 3 years in U.S. Army counterintelligence, mostly in Europe. He speaks German and French and is conversant in Spanish. He lived in Europe for 6 years off and on, 3 years in Africa, a year in Canada, a year in the Bahamas. That must have been a nice one, Bob, that year in the Bahamas. He is for 4 decades, he's been behind the International Forecaster, a compendium of information on business, finance, economics, social, and political issues worldwide. He visits with us regularly. It's my pleasure to welcome back to the Global Freedom Report, Mr. Bob Chapman. How are you, Bob?
Well, fine, thank you. It's nice to be here again.
Well, and happy Thanksgiving to you and yours.
Well, thank you, and the same.
Hey,
to you as well.
Thank you. You've given workshops at like hundreds of business conferences. How would you honestly characterize the current climate with respect to the potential for business opportunities, investments, or developments, or any kind of business opportunities? Is this a good, a bad time, indifferent?
Well, I think it's probably not a good time. There's a lot of pressures. It's hard to raise money. It's hard to borrow money. You got to have your own money. It can't be a business that you haven't been in before. It has to be something you know well. You have to have a 200% chance of success in that business. The world economy is slowing down again now, and it'll start showing up in a big way this coming year and the year after. And I see higher unemployment, depending upon what they do to the economy, but it should start to creep up over this next year into it's 22 5/8% right now. That's the real number, and it should move up into the 25% area, maybe even higher. And you've got this non-recovery phenomenon going on in many countries. We see it in Europe, particularly Germany, which was a leader, and now in China and Japan. We're seeing it in the United States evolve, Brazil, and I think it's going to get more difficult as we go along. So if you're going to start a business, you better be very, very, very careful.
Okay, that's good. That's fair advice and such for people. Because I know a lot of people say when times are like this is the best time to do stuff. And I would tend to go with the winds that you've just described. It's been a couple months since we visited. Is there anything that's happened in the last 2 months that you think is particularly significant to world either politics or economics?
Well, I think the situation that's been evolving in Europe since almost the beginning of this year is very catalytic. It could send the whole world into a tailspin, and many people have followed it a great deal. But the climate is so changed among the players in Europe. I think what the solvent countries have decided to do is to cut loose the weaker countries. They've discovered, and I told them this 2 years ago, in Germany and Greece and elsewhere, that there's no way that the solvent countries can bail out the insolvent. Just to keep them going sideways, they probably have to come up with between $4 and $6 trillion, and that's enough to bankrupt the solvent countries. So they finally have come to the conclusion, which I did long ago, that they have to be allowed to go bankrupt. And I think that's what's going to happen. And the losses to banks and to nations is going to be large.
Recently, both United States and Israeli media have ramped up rhetoric in favor of a war with Iran. It's hard to ignore that that's the meaning of what they're saying and what they're printing. However, other what I consider credible sources have indicated it's only saber rattling. What do you think? Is the U.S. going to enter a war with Iran, either directly or in support of Israel?
There's a good possibility of that, but I think that they might be also saber-rattling and waiting to see if they can get some of these Arab nations to go after one another. And that would mean perhaps some of them taking aim at Iran themselves. Difference in theology as many other things. And so I don't think at the current time that there's going to be an invasion. And this has been going on so long, years, that they're going to go in, they're going to do this, they're going to do that, and everybody's been wrong. And so we just don't know. And so it's an open question that I don't think anybody except those on the inside can really give a guess to. The use of propaganda is massive, and we see that all the time. And the brainwashing of the public, they don't have a clue what's going on most of the time because they watch major media and television, and so that's something that's on the plate. But will it happen? I don't know.
Well, I think that's very interesting what you said, because I've expressed this as a general strategy to people, that you want to get, like, for example, if you're dealing with overbearing government, you want to get the government's own inner bureaucracy to start investigating itself. Okay, start eating itself, the snake eating its own tail. And that's kind of what you just described here. As a general strategy, it's very, very sound. I wonder if that's what it is. It could be trying to foment conflict among Arab states. That's quite good. What do you think about the Occupy Wall Street protests? They've swept the U.S. and pretty much the world. And do you think, it's a double question. One, what do you think about the protests in general? And second, do you believe there is some group or maybe some organized influence behind them? It seems like it swept the world very fast.
Well, there's no question it's organized. And the background to this is one that very few people know about or have looked into. And the privately owned Progressive insurance company, which is owned by Peter Lewis, is a billionaire. And he has a foundation called Tides Foundation. And that foundation is financed by his company, himself, and friends, and one of which is a very, very large contributor and friend, George Soros. And if you remember back several years ago, Soros was behind the colored revolutions in Eastern Europe. They were all somewhat successful, and eventually they were unsuccessful as a group. But they caused a lot of havoc. And so I think that's what they were up to here. And incidentally, Mr. Lewis is a promoter of outlawing Christian nativity scenes at Christmas, and he is the financier and protector of NAMBLA, which is the North American Man-Boy Love Association, and their motto is sex before 8, before it's too late. So you should be aware.
God. Is that really their motto?
Yeah, that's right. And, all we're telling is the truth here, so people don't get upset. That's just the way life is. And we can't stop people from doing everything we'd like to stop them from because we don't control the government. But anyway, so I think what they were up to is this. Well coordinated all over the world. Lots of money. And I think what they wanted was violence in order to justify the imposition of martial law in the United States. This is what they think they were looking for. And what happened was that they put on their shows And a lot of people came, and they told the people who were there, said, wait a minute, these complaints about what's going on in America are true, but the solutions sound like something which Karl Marx would write, and those aren't the answers. And they proceeded to tell the people the correct answers. And I think that neutralized their movement to a great extent. And, of course, they had President Obama and his brown shirt acorn people running around doing their thing in conjunction with that, and that certainly solidifies the original opinion that that's how this whole thing came together, and that's how it was financed, and that's who's in on it. I think it'll continue, and in places it will turn violent. But I think the job of neutralization has been done reasonably well by people who stepped out of the crowd, which is great. Well, will they continue? Probably.
Well, since we talk about violence, probably the greatest violence that the Occupy protests have seen have been violence committed by the cops. The protests have spawned a surge in incidents of what I call thug cop brutality. And can you comment on that? Do you think the cops are using these protests as a convenient excuse to exert force on the citizenry, or is something else happening?
No, I think that's true. And I also think they want more modern equipment to turn them into military units, or quasi-military units, which is not what policing would be all about. And that is encouraged by the federal government for the federalization of law enforcement. And if the money's good enough, they'll go along with it. And with that said, then the problem arises, who's doing this? And you see it by their actions. They have certain people who wantonly kill people. One young man, a veteran of the Middle East wars, was shot in the side of the head with rubber bullets and has since died. Police are not supposed to be killing people who are unarmed or who are not threatening violence. But that's happening. It's happening everywhere, New York, Oakland, many places. And I'm sure that the law enforcement agencies throughout the country are aghast at these things going on, but it's something that they have to contend with and put up with, and hopefully try to change that attitude in other departments that are doing those kind of things. But the federal government's behind the whole thing.
That's at least a fair conclusion. If we don't know for certain, it's certainly a fair guess. All right, let's move back over to Europe now. Okay, you've said a lot already about what's happening there. Your thoughts on the instability of the union. How long can the euro last? I mean, it seems like we keep looking and it's saying it's going to crash. It's got to fall apart. How long can the euro last? And by the way, how does all of what's happening in Europe affect the dollar?
Well, first of all, as I started to say earlier, they're going to abandon the 6 countries that are in trouble. They're going to go bankrupt. The banks and the sovereign nations who own their bonds are going to take losses. And they're willing to do that because they can't pay the bill. The bill isn't $4 or $6 trillion. It could be 10 or 20 trillion. These people, some of them just don't get it. And a good example is the just defeated socialist government in Spain that had been in power for about 6 years. And the first thing out of the media's mouth is, well, the people who are a bunch of fascists. Well, that's not true. And that party is a business-oriented party, and they're not a bunch of fascists, but they won strongly, and they control 12 of the 17 provinces or states, if you want to call them, within Spain. And I lived in Spain, and I know where people are coming from, as many European countries that I lived in, and I speak their languages. I think what's happening here is 2 things. The move to rescue 8 or 10 of the 17 members in the euro, to keep the euro together, and at the same time extract what would we call it? A piece of the operating of a state. We'll take Germany as an example. What they would like to do is have all the fiscal decisions that are made in Germany made by an 8-man committee called the ESM, and the voting will be going on between now and the end of the year by these countries. And of course they'll accept it, and they're trying to convince the German people who have to vote for this thing that it's a good idea. And if you take away the fiscal ability of a sovereign nation, that sovereign nation is then subservient to those who have control over fiscal decisions in their countries. And that means they, in essence, lose their sovereignty. And that's very, very important, because it's a major move towards world government.
Well, now, what you just said, it raises an issue. I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is fascinating, and it's something I wanted to ask you. Okay, now, I suspect that I'm being somewhat economically naive in this. So, okay, when I start to explain this, you're going to probably think, oh, you can't do that for some reason, and I'm hoping you can explain it to me. What would happen if EU member states such as Greece, Italy, Spain, Ireland simply repudiated their debts and reverted to their respective currencies? Now, I understand this might mean they have bad credit with the international financial community, but wouldn't starting over be preferable to financially enslaving their governments to the international bankers?
I've been preaching this to those governments and the citizens of those governments on radio and television and in editorials all over Europe for the last 2 to 3 years. So you're right.
You mean I'm not being economically naive?
Default on the debt, go back to your original currency, but make it worth 50% or maybe 70%, dependent upon the country. So it will be competitive with the euro. And go to the business of somewhat austerity over the next 5 to 8 years, and so you'll have a depression. You're going to have it anyway, no matter what.
Yeah, but I mean, then at least you start with a fresh foundation.
Exactly. And so that's what the solvent countries now want them to do. They discovered that they couldn't make it work the other way. And under this and involved during this time of crisis, it is crisis, this is going to be, could be, far worse than what we saw when Lehman went under. And we're headed that way at the moment. This next year is going to be dreadful, and the following year might be worse. And it'll spread to the United States. I'll explain that in a minute. But that's where they're headed right now. They want to strip the states, which are the sovereign states, of Germany and France and so on, of their ability to run their own countries. And that will bring them close to the world government. Try to keep the euro intact. I don't think they can do it. It was a nightmare from the very beginning. I have been writing about this for some 12, 15 years. They did everything wrong, and they're a bunch of dopes, and unless they were doing it deliberately, and I don't think so. There are those who do, but I don't. And I think within 2 years they'll probably have to give up on the euro. And in the meantime, there's probably that we know of about $670 billion worth of bonds or credit default swaps that have been entered into by U.S. banks with European banks and others. And the figure may be even higher than that because they lie about everything. And so if 6 countries go under and leave the euro...
Oh, how does that affect that? Oh.
Well, that's going to take the banks down for sure in New York.
Oh, my.
They're the ones who wrote all the paper.
Now, I hadn't even thought about that particular set of dominoes. Oh, isn't that interesting? This phrase austerity program, everyone's familiar with it, but I'll tell you, 2 years ago, I don't think we'd ever heard of it. It's obviously everyone knows about it, because of Greece complying with IMF mandates. And we've heard the term applied to other EU member states. You said it yourself that this is going to bleed over to the U.S. Should we expect to hear anytime soon of so-called austerity programs in the United States? And how do you think the American people would handle such reductions?
Well, they're doing that with this program that was supposed to be come to a conclusion with this 12-man super Congress, which is nothing more than a method of getting apart from the control of government itself. And what we're going to go into here is a reduction in the spending in government. Now, it's only, let's say, $1.3 trillion that this committee was handling. They call it the Super Congress. I call it the Enabling Committee because it's patterned exactly after the Enabling Act of 1933, which the National Socialist government put into passage.
For anyone who doesn't know, that's the Nazis.
Right. I was going to get to their name in a minute. And the Nazis to be able to appoint Adolf Hitler as a dictator. They did the same thing with the Soviet Politburo. You get the Comintern in Russia right now, in China right now. And now you've got a panel of 8 in Europe that's going to do the same thing. Bypass the elected members of Congress.
Yeah, but they couldn't come up with... they couldn't do anything. They've already said we failed.
Well, yeah, I know that. But what is in place is a mandatory group of cuts, which will take place. And the two biggest places, as far as I can see, are Social Security and Medicare. Things that people paid for that they're not going to get all of now. How they're going to change that, they'll probably raise the Social Security age to 69 from 67 and a half, where it is now. And they'll probably cut down on procedures in Medicare. And as you know, if it's not rescinded by the Supreme Court, we're going to get Obamacare. And Obamacare has their death panels, and anybody who's over 60 who looks like they might last too long and cost too much money, they're not going to treat them.
Well, and now there's some rumblings in Congress about passing a law to repeal the mandatory reductions that were the foundation of the entire agreement back last summer. So I have no idea. It is such a mess. It is such a mess there. Do you have any particular predictions or prognostications for 2012?
Dreadful. Covers it all in one word. It's going to be awful. Unemployment will be higher. Loans will be harder to get. Big banks in America and Europe are going to get hit with massive losses. They're already broke.
What do you think people
Believe
should do?
me, they are broke.
How would you recommend people prepare?
Oh, the only thing that people can do is, number one, dehydrated and freeze-dried foods, a water filter, weapons, plenty of ammo and clips. The next step would be gold and silver coins. The next step after that would be gold and silver shares, because gold and silver is going to be the only place to be other than the basic structure that I just told you. That's the most important. What comes after that is extra. And that's the only safe place that you can go to.
I would have to agree with you on all that, except possibly, it occurred to me, possibly shares in oil companies.
The problem with that is, and I've been doing this in that venue for 53 years. I was one of the largest brokers in the country, almost 30 years in Wall Street, owned my own company. And when the market goes down, oil and gas stocks go down with it. And you pick up today's paper after the closes, or you go and look, look at all of the oil and gas stocks, but particularly the oil stocks.
Oh, interesting. All right,
and,
Bob.
And you'll find that they all went down today.
We are out of time. I want to make sure everyone gets the information. www.theinternationalforecaster.com. Do we still have the toll